Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis. And today's topic of discussion is on education. And the conversation on education, I want to talk about the word no and how growth really ties into what you decline. When I think about growth and when I think about no, it translates beyond what you yourself will confirm, will accept, or reject. It goes beyond that. It goes to even to the extent where people think of you. They think about how you are showing up and how you've shown up, and in that they decide even on your behalf whether it's something that they think that you would or wouldn't be aligned to. This is all really within, I feel, the domain of growth. I want to talk a little bit about personal experience around this. I've always been someone who's been very, very social. I've always been someone who really loved to be in the thick of things, right? All to say, I recognized, and it was much later in life that I really took it as a sign of respect, to be honest, that people were starting to pick and choose like what they would want me to be included in. And at first I thought it was rejection. I was like, well, I'm a party, I love to have fun, I love to go out, but people understood that there was boundaries to that. There were lines that they could not cross with me because there were lines that I would not cross as a byproduct of my convictions, of my upbringing, and of my own personal growth trajectory. And these were things that I was very inflexible about. So there were elements of growing up, and all of us have been there, where peer pressure is rampant. But when people know that you're not someone who concedes or bends or compromises on your convictions, then they're going to pick and choose what they opt you in and what they opt you out of. As you go through and grow through different communities, even in high school, my parents were fairly rigid, and they're the ones who first implemented this. And I remember there were different high school parties that I was just not allowed to go to. It was completely not something that they would ever let me do. I think the first high school party that I really went to was my prom, to be honest. But the high school parties that my peers organized, I was not allowed to go to these parties. But then I realized growing up that when I would hear on Monday what happened on the party that took place on the weekend, there were so many things that took place that I'm so happy I was spared from, right? Especially as a woman going to those parties, as a girl going to those parties, there's just so much more risk involved. And I was so thankful in hindsight that my parents really did put a strong boundary down, because they understood some of the things that I could have been exposed to at these parties. And there were things that they were not okay with me being exposed to. And there are things in hindsight that I'm happy that I didn't have to navigate around, that I didn't need to be exposed to personally. But then I also recognized, when I started university, and now I was the one who was making the decision by way of, what parties I didn't want to go to, I realized that people started to see where my convictions lied, where my convictions stood, and they were the ones choosing, well, what kind of vibe should we or shouldn't we include Rochelle in, based on what they understood my convictions, my values, my boundaries to be. And at first I didn't really quite understand why I would hear after the fact that there was an event or there was a party and I wasn't invited. But then I recognized when I started to get the itinerary of what took place, that they understood that this wasn't going to be my kind of vibe. It was a sign of respect even. And so rather than me reject and decline outright, or me make a scene, because I have made scenes in the past when something was introduced and it was just not something I was going to do, I would leave. People would start to really align themselves to my values and to my morals, or people would create proximity or create distance based on how they understood me to be and how I would stand in my convictions. And then eventually in university I ended up working, and I really wasn't all that interested in the social scene at university. I was working on a lot of the free time that I had where my peers were engaging in different extracurricular events. And I realized in hindsight that because I was working, there was just so many situations I was spared from. And so sometimes I think that when it comes to leadership, when it comes to how it is we grow into our leadership style, a lot of it is showcased in how people react and respond to you. And I think that when I realized now, especially now, I'm thinking about leadership and thinking about my position in leadership, and I'm thinking about just the different ways that people responded to me as they got to know me. And as they got to know me, they became much more particular about what things they did and didn't invite me to. And that was because they understood that my boundaries were firm. And that was a compliment in hindsight, right? When people make the choice to not invite you to scenes or to situations or to events that they know wouldn't be your kind of vibe, because of the way that you articulate yourself, because of the way that you represent yourself, because they understand the values and the convictions that you possess. And that's respected in and of itself. And oftentimes in that rejection, I was spared from so much harm and heartbreak. And I think that when it comes to growth, when it comes to being social and wanting to socialize, I think that it's really important, especially I think personally, professionally, it's an important thing to do, but it's an important thing to do carefully. There are certain events that you just don't want to participate in, that you have no business being in. And I think that growth recognizes that even if you are a social butterfly, even if you do enjoy socializing, there are certain invitations that you don't want to have. And when people respect your boundaries, they respect that and they opt you out of that. And I remember initially I thought that it was rejection. I couldn't understand why. But then when I think now about the things that took place and the rundown of those events, like it was really just people recognizing that what they decided to, I guess, engage in, they knew that wasn't going to be my cup of tea. And I think that leadership translates that way. When you're a leader and however the ways that those translates and people respect you and receive you as the leader, then their behavior towards you shifts and changes in alignment with your leadership. You're going to find yourself being pulled into circles and into communities that really respond well and positively to your leadership. And also you're going to find that people really are making the choice that navigates you away from environments that really don't align with your leadership style. And when that rejection and acceptance, when you see that your community is starting to shift and change around how you communicate yourself to be, I think that that is its own badge of honor, because people are taking you at your word. They see that you walk in the talk that you have, that you walk in alignment with your values and with your standards. And I find that my growth has really translated in saying no a lot more than I used to, especially because I was very sheltered growing up. There's a lot of experiences that I wanted to have, I thought that I needed to have as part of, like, you know, the milestone moments and memories. But I recognized that people were themselves opting me out of because they saw my values, my convictions, and what I personally was aligned to. And then as I got older and I recognized that there are just certain spaces and places that are none of my business, like I do not belong in those spaces and places, then no's came more freely. I felt less guilt. I felt less peer pressure on saying no. And I recognized that saying no, like opting out and not having FOMO, like fear of missing out, that was part of my own growth trajectory. And I think about no now, and you think about the things that you want to or don't want to engage in. You want to think about, well, wait, does this experience align to my values? Is it aligned to my morals? Is it aligned to my convictions? And if there is a gray line, like what are some of the hard boundaries that I set where I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, so long as, you know, things go within this vein, I'm happy to continue. But if things go left, like I'm happy to opt out and to exit. And I think that it's just so important in an environment where compromise can be very much exploited, like where if it is the case that you're not quite sure where you stand, that can be something that can really be to your detriment before you enter a situation or an interaction where you're towing the line. And so because I've been very clear on like my convictions, on my boundaries, been very black and white in how I communicate those, and I've received a lot of development and a lot of training around, like especially as a female, like this is how you articulate a firm no, a firm response, so that if there is a line that's crossed, it's definitively a line that that person recognizes is going to be, you know, there's going to be serious consequences to that. Whereas I think a lot of women especially are socialized to be much more timid, to be more tentative in their language, especially when they say no, like make the no more suggestive. Whereas for me, my no's are very hard line. Like if I'm going to say no, it's a hard line no. Like there's no room for compromise, there's no flexibility. And that came with growth. That came with recognizing that I understood that it was my role to really focus on how I make sure that I limit exposure to situations and circumstances that are going to be harmful to me. I think that there's things in life that you can't shield yourself from. You're going to experience it and you're going to grow from it for sure. But there are certain things that we just don't need to experience. We don't need to have that firsthand insight. And so other areas where I felt like no was very important is the relationships that I was growing out of. And it's so interesting how when you grow and you see that your growth trajectory is no longer in step with the people and the places and the situations that you were once part of, how that creates its own friction and those relationships start to break away and die off. And that for me was very painful, because though I have always been focused on growth, and though my friends always recognized that I was focused on growth, I never thought that that growth would mean closed doors on relationships that I personally enjoyed. But it does mean that in certain situations when people aren't in alignment with some of the choices that you make that align with your growth, some of the choices, the hard choices, the decisions, or even the people that both of you are connected to that don't align with your growth, and that's going to involve a no. That's going to involve saying goodbye, right? And I think there's a lot of loss in growth that we don't recognize, but I think that when you're really committed to your own trajectory, to your own growth, to your ability to excel, that you need to recognize also that that translates that those who don't want to go where you're going, those relationships will either hinder you, they'll hold you back, or they're going to be harmful in some way, or they're going to break away, right? And it's not like hard feelings by any means, or sometimes it might be, but I think that you recognize that growth involves loss. There's a lot of loss that comes with growth, and I think that sometimes we think that we can take everything with us, and I am someone having experienced a lot of loss. There's a lot of things that I really clung to. I'm like, well, you know, I've lost so many different things. Like these are things I would like to keep. These are the things that I would like to cling to. I have really great memories associated with these things. But life itself will teach you that not everything can come come with you. Some things you have to lose, you have to get rid of, you have to just start afresh, and that's okay. Even though that grieving process can be a big deal, right? But still, growth comes with loss. But growth also comes with new doors, new opportunities, new people, places, and things. And I think sometimes if you get so caught up on the closed doors and on the relationships that we've lost and all the things that came with the sacrifice that aligns with the growth trajectory that you're on, that you're not going to be able to be receptive or open to the new normal that you're being introduced to, right? And so me, having worked internationally, having worked in different cultures and different industries across the world, I recognize that a lot of closed doors are really trajectories towards really great opportunities, open doors that enable me to align to people who are aligned to my convictions, my values, and my beliefs. And I think that growth has a funny way of doing that, right? But when you're thinking about growth, you're thinking about, well, how can I always be the best version of myself in an environment that's constantly changing, that's constantly evolving, that's constantly asking more of me? And how do I make sure that I show up in such a way that even if it is the case that I am not the one saying no, people are making that choice for me, and I appreciate the choice that they're making for me because they recognize who I am and if whether or not that person aligns to the spaces and places that they're thinking about inviting me to. And so I know now, like, if I'm invited to a specific space because I'm very clear, very loud, very proud of who I am, that invitation comes recognizing that the space that they're inviting me to is in alignment to me. Like, it's not going to be something that is completely a mismatch, so to speak. But that comes with growth. I think growth comes with being very clear on what it is that you expect, on how it is you expect to be treated, what kind of things are good for you, and when recognizing like what situations are for you, what situations are not, being very clear and being very concise about like what it is that you will or will not compromise on. And I think when people recognize that you're uncompromising, the people who do show up with respect and do show up understanding that boundaries are not things that are bendable, they're not things that you smudge, those are the people who are going to respect that and they're going to align accordingly. And the people who rub against the grain of your boundaries, of your growth, of your convictions, and those are the kind of people that you want to stay away from anyway. I think growth will tell you a whole heck of a lot about the people, places, and situations that you're aligned to. It will also inform the people, places, and situations that you break away from. But it also informs the people, places, and situations that you're going to be introduced to in the future. Like, there are going to be periods where it's a bit quiet, it's a bit alone when you're going through those transitions. And any shut door, any closed relationship is an opportunity to make a relationship or to create connections with people who are just more aligned to you, more compatible with you and your values and your beliefs. I find that to be completely true as when I think about my own personal growth. And so I wanted to have that conversation with you today around rejection being its own form of blessing in a lot of different situations. So if you feel like, there are people, places, and circumstances that you're feeling there's a little bit more friction, there's a lot less invitations going around, there's just things that are happening that make you feel like you're being excluded. A lot of that is a byproduct of how people see you and respecting some of how those convictions translate. And when they recognize that they're going to be in an environment or in a climate that's not in alignment with your convictions, and they understand that, and they choose maybe let's not include this person in this, and if that's happening more and more, then that means that your growth trajectory is putting you on a different path than theirs. And that's a closed door that we can welcome, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about that because I think sometimes the cycles of loss are hard to manage when we don't realize that every closed door is an open door. Like, every closed chapter is an open chapter. Endings are new beginnings. And so I wanted to put that on your radar if you're experiencing an ending now, a period of transition now, because transitions are very beautiful. They can be disruptive, but they're disruptive in ways that can be really insightful and really eye-opening if your focus is on growth and recognize that growth means that things around you are going to shift and change. There's going to be change in the people that you connect with. There's going to be change in the places that you find yourself in. And if you are someone who's comfortable being uncomfortable, pushing beyond your comfort zone, then you're going to give yourself an opportunity to expand, to excel, and to evolve in a way that a lot of the people who are scared and who are staying at a different level won't. And I think that it's important to know that when you're focused on expanding, on evolving, and on giving yourself the opportunity to really see beyond the normal or the scope of reference that you grew up in. And remember, I came from a really small town, right? I came from a small, tiny little town, and I thought Toronto was the biggest place in the world to me, right? Like, even having visited different parts of the world, like, I thought Toronto was a metropolitan city. And then I had the opportunity to visit cities globally, and I recognized, well, you know what? Toronto is big for Ontario, right? But it's not necessarily big for the world. But a lot of my peers that I grew up with, they'll only ever see as big as Toronto, right? And so that disparity now in perspective and views is going to translate in the relationship itself. So growth is good. Growth means that there are going to be doors that used to be open that are going to close. There are going to be relationships that used to be really heartfelt that are going to end and it's going to mean that you are going to find yourself in new environments that are going to be much more aligned to the trajectory that you're on, and that's all good news, right? And so the loss that comes with growth is a loss that we welcome, it's a loss that we are prepared to navigate and engage in, and as we figure out how our values, how our convictions, and how our beliefs are going to line up to the next thing that we find or that we encounter, or the next challenge that we face in this lifetime. So I wanted to come in here and talk about that, give you some food for thought. Now, if you are interested in having more conversations around growth, around self-mastery, around self-discovery, then we do host live events at least twice a month, every month for the foreseeable future on our website, and we invite you to check those out. Now, these events are paid events, so if you do see yourself participating in our community on an ongoing basis, then we do suggest that you take a look at some of our package plans. Yes, we do offer package plans over and above these live events, as well as access to webinars, workshops, and different opportunities to make community, create community as we focus on self-discovery. So check that out. We do also host parent-child workshops. We do provide parent-child workshops focusing on leadership development in children, because we think that we start young, right? It's not about always learning and unlearning the patterns that have really limited our growth. Sometimes we can create a really strong foundation when they're young. And for us, leadership is built on 4 core competencies. So that's why we have parent-child workshops that focus more so on autonomy, self-efficacy, compassion, and self-concept. So check those out. And if you're still here, please subscribe, join us, support us, like, follow, all of the good things. And I look forward to chatting with all of you very soon. We'll talk to you later.